Who are the greatest villains in the history of literature? Well, today I'm going to be ranking every single one of them. And we aren't just going to be focusing on villains that are evil or that are psychologically twisted. Rather, we are going to be discussing villains that take the narrative, take what the author is trying to do to a whole new level. Villains that turn a normal story into a masterpiece. Because my name is Ian, and on Right Conscious, we only talk about the greatest books and authors of all time. None of that booktube and book talk fluff. Pure classics and the wildest videos that you can find anywhere on booktube coming at you every single day. And if you guys want to help me kick off a literary renaissance, your subscription would mean the world. And so we have to talk about, first and foremost, the man, the myth, the legend. Yes, Judge Holden. But this isn't going to be a superficial analysis where we say, look at what he did. Because here on this channel, I have made over 200 videos on Cormac McCarthy and his books. I have been to San Marcos, Texas, to the Cormac McCarthy archive and read all the original drafts of Blood Meridian. And so we, of course, are going to start with why Judge Holden is so evil, what makes him such a good villain. But then we're going to peel back the curtain, and I'll talk about how McCarthy conceptualized him and created him, and I hope to do that with all the characters here today. And so what makes Judge Holden so evil is not his actions, because I can point to a million people in literature and even in history that did terrible things, that went after children, that scalped people, that killed people, that did all of this. But what makes Judge Holden so scary was that he was a very conscious individual, because Judge Holden is not some make-believe person. He was first talked about and drawn by Samuel Chamberlain in his book, My Confession. And it's a really great book, and everyone should go check it out. It's a wild story, his entire life, not even the stuff with the Glanton gang. But Chamberlain talks about how smart Judge Holden was, that he was really 50 IQ points higher than anybody else out there. He was fluent in multiple languages, and he had a deep knowledge, not just of science, but of philosophy, of religion, and all of these different things. And what makes someone like Holden so different than everyone else who was evil in history was that Holden had this open world to be evil in. But someone like him had read Hegel, had read Nietzsche maybe, had read Schopenhauer, had read Spinoza, had been exposed to the Renaissance thinkers, to the Greeks, to Aquinas. He had one of the greatest bodies of knowledge at his disposal. Because when you listen to him talk, not just in Blood Meridian, but what he says in Chamberlain's account, you could tell that he most likely went to university and came from an affluent family and continued his self-education. So he was exposed to everything and decided to reject it all, decided to go pure evil. And he was in the perfect moment in a land that was unconquered, where he could do whatever he wanted to, and stack the kill count and the body count as high as he wanted. There were people out in the Wild West, mostly unconscious, but some conscious, like Judge Holden, who stacked up thousands of kills across their tenure. Because if you think about being out there, if you start at maybe 25 and you're doing it for 20 years, that's 7,000 days, everybody. And so when we look at these serial killers or these people who we think are evil, even the ones with a really high kill count are nothing compared to what Judge Holden was doing. And then when we look back at history, there were plenty of people that were killers. There were people like in the Spanish Inquisition that were conscious, that were torturing people and killing people as a job. There were people who used to fight in wars and kill a lot of people. But the difference between them and Holden was that someone like Holden had to go out into the world and kill each person individually, round them up, most likely rip them out of their home and kill them and rape them or do whatever else he was doing. And as we see in Blood Meridian, it doesn't matter who it is. It could be Indians, it could be Mexicans, it can be white people, boys, girls. He's killing dogs. It doesn't really matter. And so he's this perfect combination of actually going out and doing it, being in a world that allows him to do it while being totally conscious of it. And he doesn't have to worry about being sloppy. He doesn't have to worry about the FBI or fingerprints or getting caught. He can just go and do it. To open things up, That's what makes Judge Holden the scariest individual. Because one of the more funny things about all these videos on Judge Holden is that I feel like beginner readers, I should say this, when people first read Blood Meridian, they maybe idolize Judge Holden or think that he actually has something worthwhile to say. You know, in our culture that is becoming more moral relativistic, more nihilist, more detached, more cynical, that has more and more men that are detaching from actual experiences in the world, like having kids, having a family, or just spending time out in nature, martial arts, all these different things. When you have more and more guys getting sucked into the funnel of sports betting, gambling, video games, being single, not actually having contact, not even with other people, but with God, with nature, with hunting, with all these different things, they're going down the cynical, ironic, logic bro tube. And when you hear someone like Holden preaching this idea of not natural law in the higher sense, but like animal law, God's law, this inverted Nietzschean philosophy, people lose their mind over it. Just how people lose their mind over Nietzsche and all this other stuff. But if you actually read the novel, the men don't take him very seriously. He'll go on about the parable of the harness maker and go on this beautiful rant. And the men just kind of look at him and then walk away. No one's like asking questions. No one's really saying, and McCarthy specifically talks about them like walking away or not saying anything to him, which signals to me that these men who are evil, who are committing these evil acts, know that this guy's even crazier. They're like, Jesus Christ, because Holden isn't just trying to kill people. He's trying to conquer the world through his notebook. He is trying to turn all the world into simulacra. He is trying to contain it all. And this is why Judge Holden doesn't link up to the Christian conception of the devil. Cormac McCarthy was a Gnostic. Cormac McCarthy evokes the Gnostic term, the Ogdoad, in Blood Meridian. Cormac McCarthy uses the term Gnostic in Outer Dark. Cormac McCarthy uses the word Anareta, and I could go on and on. Cormac McCarthy conceptualized Judge Holden not as this biblical figure, the devil, but rather either the demiurge himself, which is the false god, or more likely a Gnostic archon of evil who is in service to the demiurge, trying to throw the world deeper into illusion, deeper into evil, trying to stamp out any spark of life. And McCarthy, like his favorite author, Herman Melville and Moby Dick, was very, very interested in Gnostic thought. And like I said, I've made dozens of hours of content talking about this. But let me build it up for you guys piece by piece. And this has never been done on YouTube before. So how did Judge Holden become so evil? How did he become this character that we all know? Well, when you read the early drafts of Blood Meridian, Judge Holden isn't anywhere near as crazy or as evil as he ends up in the final draft, because Cormac McCarthy started Blood Meridian in the mid-1970s. And as the 1970s wore on, McCarthy left his second wife and moved to Tucson, Arizona, then eventually El Paso, Texas. And if you guys heard the story about McCarthy dating a 16-year-old girl, and there were a ton of inaccuracies in that article, which has led me to talk about how he maybe even dated a 14-year-old girl, or there were multiple underage girls. It's either one of those two realities. Then you know that he was kind of tapping in to, as this 40-year-old, this evil part of himself. Because people will say dating a 16-year-old isn't immoral or wrong, but when you're a 40-year-old, a literary genius, and you're dealing with an orphan, it's total manipulation. I mean, it's the balance of power is just so out of whack. But in the late 1970s, two things happened. Three, if we include his underage love affairs. In 1977, the Gnostic Bible, the Nag Hammadi Library, was translated and released into English for the first time. And McCarthy, who had read before this Han Jonas's The Gnostic Religion, and McCarthy, who was an avid reader of over 20,000 books by the end of his life, of course heard about this and read it. And that's why there was a huge increase in Gnosticism in some of his novels like the screenplay The Gardener's Son, Suttree, and Blood Meridian, which all came out around this time. and The Passenger, which was being written. And you probably don't know, but the Right Conscious Book Club is the most active book club in the world. We read anywhere from 4 to 6 novels every single month. And we read a Cormac McCarthy novel every single month. Our book club is hosted on Substack. And I can guarantee you, if you come, and I don't care if you are a new reader or an expert, that you will talk about the book with others for at least 10 minutes. No other book club online can guarantee that either. We read nothing but transformative novels, only the best, and so go check out what we're reading for the next 5 or 6 months. And if you join, you get access to my Substack, which has over 100 hours of content that is just like this and even better. I have literature courses, writing courses, and content on so many things. It's kind of getting insane now how much is building over there. This month over on Substack, though, I'm also relaunching my free writing school, which was a massive success last year, but I'm relaunching it on Substack because Substack is the home of the literary renaissance. And so get your account ready now. I do free live streams over there. I post free content all the time, and the best writers and readers and commentators on reading and writing are all on Substack. And so if you are not over there, you aren't on the best social media platform available anywhere online right now, and I would love to see you over there. I will put my link down in the description below, and each subscription, whether free or paid, helps me so much because since quitting my job, I am out here on the grind trying to make a dream, this full-time dream, into a reality. And so thank you for the support, and now let's get back to the rest of the video without any more interruptions from me. And McCarthy started to get deeper and deeper into physics and science. And in 1981, he received the MacArthur Fellowship, which made him a rich man. It was about $1 million in today's term, and exposed him to Nobel Prize winning scientists. And he got to hang out with these guys. He became friends with these guys. And McCarthy was really interested in science before that, but Judge Holden and how he was being conceptualized changed during this period in the late 1970s because, first of all, the Gnosticism. After 77, a lot of these Gnostic references started to get added in. McCarthy, during the late 1970s, from what I could tell in Suttree and Blood Meridian, and from the notes that he was taking in the draft he wrote in the Marginalia, he was getting into alchemy, the occult, Eastern philosophy, all of this stuff, which is, if you come from a Catholic background like him and you're exposed to all that and you're basically being a hedonist and, leaving your wife, your second wife, leaving your first child behind and getting with underage girls, like you're really tapping into this energy. And then he realized the true evil of our reality, which is hyper-rationality, which is the logic bros, which is materialist reductionism. Because also in the late 1970s, McCarthy wrote the screenplay for No Country for Old Men. He wrote about the hyper-rationalist Anton Chigurh, who, with the flipping of his coin, was reduced to even a more evil state than Holden because he just became a system. He became the algorithm, and we don't need to get into that right now. McCarthy also finished a draft in 1980 of The Passenger, which features Alicia Western, who is this hyper-rational prodigy in the fields of physics, who's going crazy and has schizophrenia because of it. And her life, she is the ultimate hyper-rationalist. And when you read The Passenger, and you can go read now his draft that came out in 1980, even though it didn't come out for 42 more years, you could see that this exposure to scientists and this new world showed McCarthy that a lot of these people are really, really evil. McCarthy writes about in The Passenger how a new conception of evil was created because of the atom bomb. David Lynch covers this also in Twin Peaks. When the nuclear bomb goes off, you see Bob coming out of it. That's where Bob and the energy of him was created. But where did all that start? And in my recent video on Thomas Pynchon, I talked about how the closing off of the West, the final frontier, eventually led to this new conception of evil. And that's why the epilogue of Blood Meridian is talking about this new and evil future. It also could be a Gnostic metaphor. Anyway, and so Judge Holden denies metaphysical depth. He says your heart's desire is to be told some mystery. The mystery is that there is no mystery. And this mirrors the hyper-rationalism of Chigurh, Alicia Western. They taught the same way, but also Eli, the old man in the novel and the movie The Road. He has this very pessimistic, hyper-rationalist view of reality. And so Holden isn't interested in sin and pulling people even into sin. He is interested in malignant sovereignty. sovereignty over everything. He views that the world has nothing in it, that it's flat. And if he can name it all, catalog it, and kill it all, then he can own the entire world. He is trying to annihilate the sacred, not the sacred as in just like our Christian conception of the world because I'm the devil, but everything that is sacred. And when Holden declares himself the Caesarian of the earth, he is talking about this new theology. He is preaching for a deterministic universe where killing is the new sacrament. And so let's talk about the devil now, because the devil is this creature, Satan, this fallen angel. He's a parasite. What does he do? He tempts people. He accuses other people. He mimics people. But he can't create something out of nothing. Look at theology. He can only corrupt what God has created. Holden, though, is claiming total ownership over reality. What does Holden say? No other gods nothing else other than me. Who does that sound like? That is the Old Testament God. That's the huge inversion that I find so funny. That because of Wendy Goon and other people, Wendy Goon, who's a Christian, that Wendy Goon came out and said, Judge Holden is the devil. And now that's been repeated. And a lot of kind of this new humanities crowd, that a lot of them are Christians or new Christians, are saying that Judge Holden is the devil. But they don't realize that Cormac McCarthy, the Gnostic, was actually saying that Judge Holden was Yahweh. So Judge Holden is actually who they think is God. And so even if Holden isn't the demiurge and he's an archon, he's a higher archon than the devil because he's not tempting you. He is writing the rules. Another thing that you can look at is, first of all, Jacob Boehm's epigraph, but also this idea that he's sleeping, that he's fiddling, that he's always smiling, all these things. He's not a sinner. He's not this fallen being. He is the darkness itself. And when you look at the end of Blood Meridian, his eternal dancing, what we see happening at the end, is an anti-eschaton. He is eternally present. Satan can be destroyed under God's verdict. The judge writes the verdict, creates the world, and does what he wants in it. He is the original technocrat. He has quantified, he's the original big data. He has quantified the world. He has figured out everything's names, and he runs rampant over it with immorality. He doesn't come to you. He doesn't come to the kid and bargain for a soul. Do you see how, if you look at how the judge and the kid bargain, it's not that. He builds the system, abolishes all meeting, and then tells everyone that that's enlightenment. And that's the scariest thing of all, because that's the world we live in now, you guys. It doesn't have to happen out in the middle of Arizona anymore. It happens to us right now as you are on this app. It happens every single time you're on your phone. It happens in our control system, in our surveillance society, every time you go out into the world. It's insane. And so what's scarier than just getting killed or getting scalped or children getting hurt is someone who does all that and then is simultaneously destroying not just the civilization, but meaning itself. Because when you look at all these groups, all these, the Alexander the Greats, the Genghis Khans, all these people all throughout history, people get so mad. I met some lady from Mongolia and she's like, it's Genghis Khan. And then I said that once on a video and everyone raged. All of them wanted to install a new form of meeting, their form of civilization. Holden's trying to contain and get rid of it all. That's when things get scary. He's not some unconscious barbarian who just is slashing and trying to kill everybody, like in some horror film. He's not some sci-fi character that's, coding something and killing everybody at once. He's doing it by himself, person by person. How much crazier can you get? And that's what McCarthy slowly started to conceptualize. So if you read the earliest draft that you can find, we don't have the first, I think, or the second in the archive. We have like the third. Holden's kind of like slapsticky, like he's evil, but it reads like almost like a Larry McMurtry Western, like not too much depth. A lot of the speeches weren't there. Some of them were there. It was forming. But over time, McCarthy started to assign Holden these supernatural qualities, being able to hold the Tucson meteor over his head, which weighs like 800 pounds. Like that's a world record. Like if he's able to, snatch it up there from the ground, and it's an odd object. You can go see it at the Smithsonian in New York. He's able to survive, first of all of this. He's able, they find him naked out in the desert. He also doesn't develop or age, at the end of the novel after decades. He's hairless. He's existing in this like pure intellectual state. He's obviously very tall. Someone describes him as certainly more than human in the novel. And seemingly he doesn't die. And so all that stuff, like everything I just added, got romanticized and added by McCarthy. And this is actually McCarthy's method. So McCarthy writes his earlier drafts in a very simple and almost stream of consciousness type way. He just kind of, McCarthy's actually a trauma writer. He usually finds some inciting incident in his life and writes from that. Or in this case, he takes a historical event and writes from that. Usually he doesn't write like these crazy original things. His first novels were like writing about his dad. His later novels were anyway, I could go on, but he writes this kind of very flat story. Like if you read it, if McCarthy posted the first draft of Blood Meridian to Substack, or even the second draft, if he posted the fourth draft, a draft he'd been working on for 5 years, you would say this story sucks. It's wild how much good editing and good revising can turn an author into something. That, McCarthy spent, we got Blood Meridian over here, 5,000 to 10,000 hours revising this novel. It took him a decade of working multiple hours a day. I can't, hard to tell the exact time, but it was a lot of time. The average novelist spends less than 1,000 hours actually doing deep work on something that they put out there and complain isn't good, and they don't have a good editor. Don't get me going. And so McCarthy eventually starts stripping it away. So McCarthy writes in a more emotive and maximalist and revealing way, and then eventually strips a lot of that away and starts adding in symbolism, supernatural qualities, and some of these like really epic speeches. And he does this time and time again with almost all of his characters. A lot of the supernatural stuff doesn't make it in until the last draft or two, because he knows that if he gets the base right, if he gets the story right, if he gets a lot of those parts right, that he can add this hidden stuff later, because that's what real revision is. McCarthy didn't add all the layering and the stuff related to astrology, tarot, Freemasonry, Gnosticism, the Kabbalah, alchemy, Christianity, a lot of that stuff until the later drafts also. And so that's his methodology. And so for Holden, that's what he did. He found this guy, he put him in these situations, he kind of recreated the framing of what Chamberlain did, and then I think just kept turning the dial up. And a lot of that demiurge, him trying to contain the world stuff, the dream at the end with this coin forager that really pushes this idea that he's trying to contain the world, all of that didn't get added until more until the final stage of the race. And so that's just a really interesting note, that you don't necessarily need to start with evil, but you can add evil later, because it's always easy to make someone more evil, but it depends on how strong the story is around it to turn it into a masterpiece, to create a Judge Holden type figure. And so if you guys have any questions about Judge Holden, his conception, anything for me, let me know. I love talking about this. As you guys can see, I could literally make this an 8-hour video, but that's why he's scarier than anyone else on this list. And so moving on to another character, and let's hope the Blood Meridian movie is good. Crossing my fingers. And this is going to be a controversial pick, but it has to be Nurse Ratched. There has been this weird political literary movement to try to rewrite who Nurse Ratched is. They'll say Randall McMurphy was a statutory rapist. So next up we have Captain Blicero from Gravity's Rainbow, and he is one of the most evil characters of all time, everyone. And it's because Pynchon knows how to layer a character in terms of adding psychic and sexual energy to their character that make them all the more insane. And so, as I'm sure many of you guys know, the occult was a really big deal at the start of the 20th century. There was like this occult revival, and the Nazis had a ton of ties to the occult, and many officers in the SS were very into the occult. And Blicero is this weird techno-fascist priest that is pushing for the death drive to manifest in reality. And he does this through his fascism by creating this fairy tale witchcraft scenario with young children and fusing all that to rocket science. Yes. There's a reason why Gravity's Rainbow is called one of the hardest books of all time, and it's one of the most unfinished books of all time. And Blicero is obsessed with this idea of Thanatos, or the death drive. Freud loves to talk about this. And he is doing this process of what he calls whitening, because the town that Blicero's rocket plan is in is named Blicero, which means basically a whitening field. And the name Blicero is a variation of a Latin word that means death. And what's interesting is that he's wearing an all-black SS uniform, but is in this process of whitening. And this obviously has connections to Nazism. And before Blicero became this rocket man, as Elton John would say, he was a leader of a colonization project in Southwest Africa that was very brutal, that was only focused on annihilation. And so one of the most evil things that he does that separates him from everything. So he has this crazy ideology, right? He's this evil Nazi. But in his house, he has captured an underage girl and an underage boy. And he constructs a chamber in this house, like an alchemical chamber, that is meant to mirror Hansel and Gretel, the story. And his eventual goal is to strip these children of all their individuality, of all their flavor, of all their personality through just insane acts that I won't talk about, you can imagine, until they become purely obedient. And when you read about the rituals, like they're not just torture scenes. And that's what kind of the depth of, these really great literary writers can show us. I was just talking about the contrast with the names and all of this stuff. When it comes to his character, there's hundreds of these. And like the rituals that he does mirror the Eucharist and so many other rituals, but in the most perverted and inverted way. But that's not the end of it. That's not the end of his evil. So he is kind of engaging in this Nazi, and one could even say early 20th century idea of we can program people. We can just MK Ultra them, whatever, Manchurian candidate them and turn them into whatever we want. But he's gone totally rogue with it. Blicero is also obsessed with rockets because he believes that the rocket is this void, is this coffin that's designed to deliver a soul into heaven in its most pure form, which is through annihilation, right? Through this technological boom, you're blown up. And like, I know we're going all the way here. That's why I'm saying that's why he's the most evil guy. And there are the most insane lines in this novel. Like, spoiler alert, Gravity's Rainbow doesn't have a plot. It's a wild book, so you're not going to miss anything by me saying this. But at one point, he puts one of these children into the rocket and launches it so that he can carry pure whiteness to ultra white. Like the lines that Pynchon writes about all this, like the true moment of shadow is the moment in which you see the point of light in the sky, is so good, so insane. It's why it's probably one of the greatest, if not one of the greatest novels of all time. And so Blicero is not like Oppenheimer or these people making the rocket. He's trying to turn the human body, our soul, into pure mathematical light, gravity's rainbow. And eventually he becomes this kind of mythic figure in the novel. But this is kind of one of the philosophical emphases of the novel. And one of the scariest things is that what Blicero is doing isn't some Nazi fetish. It's actually the highest extreme of the logic of Western civilization, of the programming that we are doing. We want a world filled with total purity. We want pure data, autonomous AI, a control system that allows us to have pure order. Our desire as a society and where we're headed right now is to return to zero, to return to the zone. And Blicero is a wild character. There's a lot more here, and I could just kind of go on and on. But as you can kind of tell, it's all really weird. But he is one of the strongest dark personalities in a novel or any art form that I have ever seen. And so if you have not read Gravity's Rainbow yet, now is the time. Go pick it up. Go try it. And if you can get through it, you are going to be mind blown, and you will see it's one of the greatest novels ever. And so moving on to our next villain. So next on our list, we have Captain Ahab from Moby Dick. And I really wanted to bring up Captain James Hook or Long John Silver from Peter Pan or Treasure Island, but they aren't as good. But I have a big soft spot for pirates. I love black sails and anything to do with pirates. But we're talking about the greatest villain of the sea. It has to be Ahab, the traumatized captain. And let me start off with the most surface level take possible before we dive into the dark and turbid waters, everybody. You do not want to be stuck on a boat with this guy. Am I right, everybody? That is not a voyage that you can get off of once it starts. But Ahab has the ability, as we are kind of seeing with a lot of these characters, to manipulate and coerce the men around him to not just go on a trip against to go find Moby Dick, the white whale, but rather to go on a journey against being itself. Ahab says, "Talk not to me of blasphemy, man. I'd strike the sun if it insulted me." All visible objects, man, are just pasteboard mass. And Ahab is such an OG because he looks at the crew and the mission to go hunt this whale and says, "Yeah, this is going to be a really big deal. This is the uncatchable whale." But he takes his own little petty grievance, his trauma, and says, "You know what? That sucks, but I'm also going to one up all of it, not just for me, but for everyone." And that trauma gives me permission to implode a reasonable metaphysical point of view. I could do whatever I want to anybody. And Melville says, as he is forming the cult on the ship, because it doesn't happen instantly, that the sultanism of his brain became incarnate in an irresistible dictatorship. He forges rituals and gives the men symbols to get them into the hunt. He puts the doubloon on the mass. He regiments the crew with call-in responses. He makes them drink from their chalice. "Drink ye, harpooners, death to Moby Dick. God hunt us all if we do not hunt Moby Dick to his death." And so he's beyond David Goggins, right? Much like a lot of these characters, like there was an alchemical ritual in Blood Meridian with the men peeing on the gunpowder in the volcano, all of that stuff. There, we just heard from Blicero. A lot of the other characters we're going to talk about engage in these rituals. And that's how you take things to the next level. A lot of people don't understand the point of a ritual. People think that the point, like I say the word ritual and it thinks like we're doing an incantation and we're manifesting a spirit. I'm going to tell you guys a secret. That never happens. What a ritual makes you do. If you've ever been to church before, why do you go to church? Is it so that you can go to heaven? You go to church because it makes you hyper suggestible. You go in there and there's the music. There are other people. Maybe you're dressed a certain way. You're in the mood. There's incense if you're at a Catholic church or, in an Indian type church. And then you become hyper suggestible. You open yourself up to hear a transformative message that you already know, but maybe you don't listen to, or you are reinforcing in your brain. We all know the golden rule, right? We all know that you shouldn't do X, Y, or Z, or, get drunk all the time or do this. But this is why people go to AA meetings every single day. And when they stop that, a lot of the time, not a lot of the time, but there's a higher chance that they become addicts again and relapse because we need repetition. We need to open ourselves up. And that's what AA meetings do with the crazy talks about people's journeys. You open yourself up, make yourself more hyper suggestible. And so rituals are meant to do that, especially specific rituals, and this is why if you start adding sex, if you start adding drugs, if you start adding all this other stuff, you become more and more hyper suggestible. And this is why psychedelics don't work for a lot of people in the modern era. They take it and they turn on, Pink Floyd, and they're like, "Oh, what a great time, I'm changed." But they're making surface level changes. But in actuality, when you look at ancient culture and people who actually make huge leaps with psychedelics, they usually have some form of a ritual or some form of messaging that they're putting back inside their soul to make that experience more effective. And this is why we've had wide-scale psychedelic use across the country and across the Western world, but most people are still asleep. All my friends that took psychedelics are not what I would call awakened individuals. They are not conscious individuals trying to create the world. They're just slightly more trippy than my friends who didn't take psychedelics. Rituals are meant to take it to the next level. But a ritual could also be upped in terms of its stakes if you are on a mission. If you are on this death mission and you're going on, that's another part of the ritual. The ocean, the sea, the darkness, the Weaver God, everything that's in Moby Dick, I keep wanting to say Blood Meridian, is enhancing it. He eventually stylizes everything too. We're going to be talking about Humbert Humbert from Lolita and style and all of that. But he gets a special harpoon in Moby Dick and bathes it in blood and baptizes it in Latin. He starts getting into this idea of manipulating energy, seeing energy as this thing that he can grasp and do whatever he wants with. And this is where people go wrong. This is actually the start of a lot of people's villain arcs. That it's not just that you break from Christianity and morality and stuff like that. It's that you believe that you are special. You believe that you can use the power of the world to your own will. And the highest version of that is using one could say the spiritual energy of the world for your own will. So I know there's a lot of logic bros out there, a lot of people that don't believe in anything outside of this world, that we're just in this materialist, objective reality, and it's just nothing other than that. But for everyone else that believes in God or something, maybe saw something on psychedelics, what we really are saying is that we believe in maybe this concept of energy. And from what I've seen, I think anyone who's religious could agree with this, is that there are two types of people you don't want to believe if you aren't an atheist. You don't want to be this passive person like that just lets life happen to you and say, I'm going to let God's will wash over me. You don't want to be a pushover. Like, there are a lot of religious people I know like this. I've seen a lot in the New Age community, and they just get walked over. This is why there are so many spiritual women that get with like just countless dudes that continue to screw them over, because they're just basically viewing themselves as a vessel of energy, and they aren't enacting their will into the world, right? Then there's the other side. There are people who enact way too much of their will into the world and learn that there's maybe this energy space or with confined energy within their own heart, and they drive that to the highest level. But a lot of the time, those people are miserable. Both sides of this aisle are usually very miserable, and the people who do nothing with energy and just sit there and aren't a participant at all usually aren't very happy or aren't living a very fulfilled or conscious life. But the people who learn to co-create with that, that's how I feel like I've been successful in life, and everyone that I know who I feel like is happy and successful, they are in that in-between zone where they are consciously creating, sometimes pushing and sometimes letting themselves get pulled. Ahab is just going pure God mode. He sees something happen. He's the lightning mask gets hit by lightning, and he's viewing that as just a part of the temple, a part of the journey. He's redirecting that energy, even though it's devastating. And at any moment, these men could just throw him off the ship or lock him up and turn it around. But they don't. It's this type of manipulation. And like many of the characters on this list, Ahab is very smart. He is a really good captain. He knows what he is doing. And what's also interesting is that even though whale hunting is like really odd, especially because like whales, in my opinion, as Cormac McCarthy talked about in his unpublished screenplay, Whales and Men, have this weird connection to God, and they evolved in a different way than us. I root for Ahab, and that's what's interesting. Like, a lot of these people, I'm kind of like, screw you. You know, I see Judge Holden ranting. I'm just kind of like, whatever. I feel like I would get down with this crew. Like, I feel like if I was on this voyage, I would be 100% checked in. But that's what's scary about him. He knows where this is going. He knows it's going to lead to basically death and annihilation, and he doesn't care. And he's using this energy to drive us there, which is scary. Which is like I'm starting to see this a lot, and you can look at this in history, but like a lot of political energy today on both sides of the aisle kind of feels like this. Like, we're going on this admirable journey, but I'm feeling like down the road, I'm like, holy crap, this looks really, really scary 5 or 10 years down the line. And so the reason that Ahab is on this list is that he is complete. All these other characters are odd in their own way, but Ahab, through his unified vision and his unified manipulation, has almost no flaws. And when you're around someone like that, it's one of the scariest things that probably will ever happen to you. So next on our list, we have Humbert Humbert from Lolita. And much like Judge Holden, it's not Humbert's actions that earn him a spot on this list, because I could point to hundreds of instances of pedos in literature, but rather it's Humbert's use of language, because most people don't realize that haven't read Lolita that there is little to no description of what happens between Humbert and Lolita in the novel. What Lolita is really about is how us as humans allow ourselves to be seduced by language. And you are not above this. Politicians, YouTubers, people do this all the time to you. It happens to us in our personal life when we overlook something immoral or odd that a family member, a coworker, our spouse, our kid, or whoever does, because a lot of the time it's justified through language. But that person who we're kind of overlooking isn't a genius. Humbert Humbert is a poetic genius, and the novel starts with a fake forward from a psychiatrist that tells us that we should read Humbert's memoir, what happened between him and Lolita as a case. It opens us up to psychoanalyze him. It opens us up to put him on trial. And Humbert, throughout the novel, addresses the reader directly. He says, ladies and gentlemen, reader, the jury. And the book is turned into a performance. It's a love letter. It's his deposition. It's like a stand-up routine. At times. It's a display in poetic prowess. And this isn't just a fun way to write a novel. It's a way for Nabokov to show us what we overlook in terms of how we treat artists in our world. Throughout time, people have kind of glossed over the immoral things that a lot of their favorite artists have done because of their use of language or their artistic skill in whatever medium. And language is actually the best way of doing this. If you look all throughout time through propaganda and everything else, it wasn't the visual arts or music that drove people to do immoral revolutions or to go kill people or go on these campaigns. It was through language, whether that was through text or through like the spoken word. And this novel overwhelms you with its literary qualities. You feel intellectual while reading this. Nabokov is such a good writer. He's one of the greatest of all time, that the style makes you detached from what's happening a lot of the time, and you have to catch yourself and be like, wait, this dude's terrible, because he's speaking about a lot of this in memory and turns up the nostalgia machine, turns up about these inward parts of himself and all these different things, the way he frames situations, not even with Lolita, but with other people, some of which are really wrong. And that's like the real kicker. That's what I realized. My guard was up. I was like, yes, what he's doing with Lolita is wrong. But the way that Humbert was framing situations with Lolita's mom and with other people, I was kind of like, yeah, these people kind of suck. But then I was thinking about it. I was like, no, he's this good. That's what Nabokov's trying to make us do. He's trying to make us sympathize with the most immoral type of person out there. But it's not Nabokov, it's Humbert doing it. This isn't some omniscient third person. It's Humbert writing to us, the reader. And that's the society we live in now. Everything gets hidden away when Humbert does his immoral acts. It's the strongest, most insane writing of the entire book, and it's all just smoke and mirrors. And what Humbert shows us, and now that I think it's now present in our society at a very deep level, is that you can present evil as an aesthetic, as a taste. I'm not talking about like goth, shadow rap, Blink-182, dark metal type aesthetic. I'm saying that many of the more evil people in the world, like, yes, there's this like barbarian class not a barbarian class. I should say there are like these unconscious individuals, as we were talking about earlier, who commit acts in like a trailer park or something like that. But then there are also people who are these modern day Holdens who use poetry and music and their cultivated mindset to be sharks, to be predators in the world. And even more genius on Nabokov's level, and even scarier, and why he is that Humbert, throughout this entire thing, never talks. He never really self-reflects. He's reflecting on a million different things, because when I look at a lot of these immoral characters in literature that are maybe doing these things, I barely get anything from them. I can just assume that they're evil and they're just using everyone as a doormat. But with Humbert, I'm getting this huge range of emotions. He should know that this is wrong. And all of this is in service to the scapegoating at the end. And I won't spoil it, but Humbert, scapegoats another character that is involved with Lolita and tries to take a lot of the energy away from himself. And this is what can happen to us now, in the modern world. We can be manipulated by people that are very, very smart. We have decades, a century worth of knowledge on advertising, psychoanalysis, neuro-linguistic programming, hypnosis, pickup artistry techniques. And people think that it doesn't work on them. Like I said, people out there think like hypnosis won't work on me. None of these grifters online make me do it. But if you're that type of person, you are actually more susceptible in the long run to getting duped even bigger. We're all susceptible, and every single day we're hypnotized by the creators online or the people in our life, by the world that we live in, the advertising, all of it, our jobs, our boss. And so there are people out there, and this is one of the things that you have to watch out for when it comes to having power. The average common individual who works at a desk job could know neuro-linguistic programming. He could know pickup artist techniques. He could know how to do all of this and manipulate people, women, men, whoever, into doing whatever he wants them to do. And all of us who read know that we also have this power. Even if we don't have specific techniques, we can enchant people with our intellect, with our words. We've all used language before. I know you have, to get to kind of weasel out of something that we maybe should have been taking full accountability for. We don't have any sense of ethics or belief in objective morality in the West anymore, especially in America. Basically everywhere, that idea has been imploded. It's not taught in schools. No one really talks about it. Even if it doesn't exist, the only way to live in a society that's actually free is if everybody abides by some form of objective morality. And because we don't have those conversations, because if we had those conversations, we'd have to restructure our entire society if we actually want to live in a moral and ethical world, then we can be swayed by style, by charisma, by all these different things. And like I said, it doesn't matter what world you look at, the fashion world, the art world, the political world, and it's happening every single day. And it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And so there you guys go. Humbert is the demon archetype of the intellectual. He is the most extreme, malignant version of where all of us could go. And so let's move on to our next villain. And so next up, we have a character from a Dostoevsky novel. And I did think about this for a while because I was thinking about the Brothers Karamazov. I was thinking about Crime and Punishment, and there were some good selections in there. But I think Dostoevsky's best villain, and I would say the best villain of Russian literature, is Demon's Nikolai Stavrogin. And Stavrogin is a wild character. I remember first reading this novel when I was like 16, 17 years old, and just being like, once again, kind of hypnotized, seduced by his character. I could say the same about Holden, about many of these characters that like the first reading are just like jaw dropped, like, oh my God, who is this person? If I'm feeling like this 100 years later, how did the people in the time feel about a dude like this? And Dostoevsky's kind of an odd guy in the sense that he very much, with some of his characters, dramatizes them, makes them a little too intellectual or smart, creates these perfect scenarios. But with Stavrogin, I feel like he came up with one of his more authentic characters ever. Because what Dostoevsky is really doing in this novel with Stavrogin is exploring the idea of the void in the modern soul. Because, I don't know if you guys know about WWE, but every hero must have a code, right? Must have some principle that they stand on to really make them a really good villain. Judge Holden is conquest. Ahab is like a monomaniac. I could go down this list and name a lot of the principles that are on this list. Stavrogin believes in nothing, basically. He is the idea of the negative capability just brought out into the world. He is this aristocrat who refuses to believe in the idea of truth at all. He also he's not like Ivan in the Brothers Karamazov, who's maybe contemplating these ideas, but not really acting on them. He's thinking this stuff, maybe talking about him. But Stavrogin doesn't believe in goodness or anything. And what makes him scary is that he has that magnetic, attractive quality. The word, ask women, maybe I could talk to the women out there if any of you guys are watching. I think you would agree that the attractive, glowing intellectual man that is radical and empowered, but is uncommitted to anything and everything, is very attractive. This is like the bad boy archetype turned up to the extreme. And what's so cool about this is that when you're a vessel of this emptiness, when you're a vessel of this nihilism, everyone else projects onto you. So there's this Jungian concept of the soul image. And there's this, if you look at the very first video I did on this channel, it's on this book called Understanding I think it's just like Understanding the Psychology of Romantic Love. And what it says is that many people get sucked into these terrible relationships because they project their deficiencies, their insecurities onto their relationship partner. So I remember when I was like 18 or 19, I went through high school and I was a huge reader, but I didn't really care about school, so I didn't get very good grades. And when I was at my first year at university, I didn't care about school either. I was like, dude, this is dumb. I knew I was going to be doing something like this. Like, I'm going to be an author. I'm going to be independent. Like, fuck the publishing industry. I knew all of that all the way back then. But I was insecure about my intellectual ability because I knew all these people that were, I have a 4.0 and they were like these perfect students and I wasn't that. And I had people like snicker at me when I said like, yeah, I'm not doing well in this class or stuff like that. This kind of this educational trauma that happens to people that I witnessed as a high school English teacher for 8 years. That's subtle, but really can knock people off. And so I wanted, through brute force, to become this intellectual. Like I started dedicating my life to it, reading 200 books a year for years. And so I remember dating this woman who was also a freshman at my college, and we went on a couple dates. And I remember telling people like, dude, she's so smart. All of this stuff. I was just talking about her intellect and all of this stuff. But then as the weeks went on, I started to realize she really wasn't intellectual at all. That I was projecting my own insecurity and inflating her. And what person is going to say, I wasn't really doing it to her necessarily, but in my head, that's what I was thinking. We're going to have this beautiful intellectual relationship, yada, yada, yada. And I see so many men I know do this constantly. They make excuses and like, they don't actually see who their partner is clearly. And it's not because, people will say, oh, it's because men are thinking with their dick, but women do the same thing. It's because we're thinking with through what we're repressing. This is the bad boy phenomenon. Women think that they can fix these men. They see these good parts of them, but don't see who they actually are. And it's all, I could go down that rabbit hole in the inner reverse psychology and all of that, but you guys kind of get what I'm saying. We really, and really being in a romantic relationship that lasts and is successful is stripping all that away and seeing your partner for what they are. And that's why once the love potion wears off, so many people drop out of relationships, get divorced. Usually after 5, 6, 7 years, you have to see your partner for who they actually are. I have an 11-month-old daughter right now. I've been with my wife for 6, 7 years now, and we've stripped it all away. I love her for her, and she loves me for me. And we don't, see each other's problems through rose-colored glasses. So Stavrogin, though, because he's so charismatic, because he's this void, is having everyone else do this to him. Because and this is a really cool thing by Dostoevsky. So during when this novel is set, Russia is moving toward political radicalization. The Russian Revolution just didn't happen out of nowhere. If you go read Tolstoy's works from decades before, the radicalization was happening. So there was this political radicalization happening to the country. There was also a lessening of religious influence in the aristocracy. If you read Joseph Frank's awesome book on Dostoevsky, you'll learn that the reason why Dostoevsky is so good at writing about the Bible is that he was a rare case of having an aristocratic family that read the Bible. Dostoevsky hung out with like folk people, like the serfs and stuff, and learned about their more like folk Christianity. Tolstoy never got that. Tolstoy would watch, through his through the barn door and see what they were doing. But Dostoevsky was talking to them, was friends with these people. And obviously his time in Siberia furthered that. And also his personal trauma, his gambling addiction and all of that drove that even further. Russia is also predisposed to having people believe in these miracles. When you look at like Orthodox Christianity and the people that do believe in it now, it's much more intense in terms of miracles and the concept of theosis and all this stuff than maybe like, what you get at like the mega church, on your street. And so in this novel, Shatov, one of the characters, sees him as this messianic political figure to bring back Greater Russia. Another character sees him as a person who can overthrow Russia. Another character sees him as this healer. Society sees him as this very like Bene Gesserit Dune level, messianic combination of genetics. Like, wow, look at him. And he never really contradicts any of them. He never says like, no, it's not what I'm trying to be. He just kind of lets everybody play into it all. And he's manipulating them by being silent. He just is like, yeah. And so he lets everyone give him everything and gives nothing in return. And this is what the detached man is, in these relationships. I know so many women, I'm a little bit older now. I only know married women mostly now. I have kids and go to groups at the library and stuff. And so, when I was younger, though, it was this hunger that there's this detached man that doesn't want you. You just want him. You become obsessed with it. Guys, simps do this also. This is what politicians do when they just mirror what the people want. They just become a void. This is what priests do. I mean, it's crazy. And so what Stavrogin really cares about, though, is his will, is about just using it to do the most immoral things and not caring about it at all. So small spoiler here, but there is this confession that was originally taken out of this novel, but eventually was placed back in, where he confesses that he sexually corrupts a 12-year-old girl. and humiliates her so much that she hangs herself. I mean, crazy stuff. He abandons he marries a girl who's disabled and abandons her. He causes all forms of humiliation all throughout the novel. I mean, it's just, like I said, I could just sit here and list them all, but he's just into this. And so we're starting to see a similar theme about this kind of cultivated intelligence that goes dark. But what makes Stavrogin really scary is that he is consciously premeditating all this. He's not just Judge Holden coming across people. It's not just one isolated incident like, Humbert Humbert. He's not doing it for some larger ideology like Blicero, as we were talking about earlier. He's just doing it to do it. And kind of the culmination of all this, spoiler alert, is that at the end of the novel, he hangs himself. But there is no confession. There is no final hoorah, and this is why I'm doing it. I feel bad. There's nothing. That's why he is one of the greatest modern villains, because he's this dark void for everybody else, but also for himself, and just kills himself. He's got no grand battle. There's no finality. There's no resolution for any of the victims. It just ends. And so pretty intense stuff, man. Demons is a really great novel. It might be my favorite Dostoevsky novel. It's really a lot of recency bias. Like, this was the last one that I read in the Right Conscious Book Club. And so I'm like, well, second to last. So I'm like, oh my God. But he is definitely the worst character in Russian literature, especially classic Russian literature. So next up, we have Iago from Othello. Shout out to Shakespeare, man. One of the best deep dives I've been doing over the last year is trying to reread every single one of Shakespeare's plays. I'm trying to read like 1 or 2 a month. It's just been blowing my mind. So if you guys don't know, Othello is a play by Shakespeare that is about a general named Othello who marries a woman named Desdemona. And Iago is humiliated and very angry because Othello decides to promote someone else who's in the army. Iago's in the army instead of him. And so Iago decides, because of this failure, or because, of this lack of promotion, that he's just going to go destroy Othello's life. And so his idea is that he's going to make Othello, he's not just going to kill Othello. He's going to try and make him believe that his wife is having an affair with this other man, Cassio, who was promoted instead of him. And what makes this so scary is that, first of all, it's not really warranted, like this situation. But Iago does this just because he can, because he knows that it's very easy to corrupt pure love. It's honestly really sad that there are people like this everywhere, that when we've all experienced them before, not to this extent, but we're in this big moment in our life. Maybe you wrote a novel, or you have a big dream, or you have a new girlfriend, and someone says like, well, she's kind of immature and she's great, but she's a little fat. I don't know, like stuff like that. And you're kind of like, or, they ask questions like, well, did you see what she posted 3 years ago on Instagram? You're like, what did she post? And so that's what Iago does, is that he is, once again, this evil intellectual. He decides to not attack Othello's body, but create spiritual warfare and turmoil in his mind. And we get to see, and that's why this is really cool, because when you read like Macbeth or something by Shakespeare, we don't really get to see very much how Lady Macbeth and Macbeth descend into madness because, of the murder of King Duncan. Like we see Banquo's ghost and all this stuff, but it's not really like that fleshed out. But in Othello, and that's probably because Macbeth was somewhat incomplete, but Iago doesn't really force hands. What he does is the ultimate thing. He just asks questions. He doesn't say, hey, look, I saw them out there. He just suggests things, asks questions, and then when the moment comes, and he could, save it and be like, yeah, they're not really together. He just stays silent. He plants evidence. He basically sends him down this rabbit hole. And it's really one of the worst things to do. Something that I think many of us experienced when we were young or on this journey is that I remember when I was like 18 and 19, I'd be talking to all my old high school buddies. I'd want them to get into what I was getting into. So I would like curate all this information and present it in a certain way so that they could get into this stuff. And looking back, like that was kind of silly because I was basically kind of trying to manipulate these people and convince them to get into something good, like reading or these ideas into deeper thinking. But, as you're doing it, it's kind of an odd experience, even if it's for something that's good, right? But if you've ever had this done to you, it feels like the worst thing. Early in the video, I was mentioning one of my crazy ex-girlfriends, and I had another crazy ex-girlfriend. Shout out to her. And she did the entire divide and conquer thing with all my friends and family, or at least attempted to. And she was like a master at it. And later on, I figured out she had done it to all these other people in her life and all of her ex-boyfriends, and just caused turmoil in all of their lives. And it was like because of this stuff. Like, we're at a party and she's, I'm doing my thing. She's talking to some other people, talking to one of my friends or someone I know. And then she'll say something like, yeah, he said this. I was like, did he really say that? And then I feel dumb for asking him, like, did you say that? But then she's building a theory around it. And then I'm slightly distrustful. I'm like, what is happening? And luckily, I didn't take a lot of the bait, and I did get manipulated, but I just somewhat detached slightly for a few months. I didn't like cut people out or like make these big stands. But I remember that we went to some event, and I brought one of my friends was just there, and I thought it was like, maybe he's probably here at this. It was this art event, and I hit him up. He's like, yeah, I'm here. And I never really told him about this guy before, but I knew him really well from skiing. Like when you ski and you ski with people, you sit on the lift with them and just chat it up for, a lot of the time. And where I was skiing, we had like this super slow lift that just, you skied for 2 minutes and you talked for 10 minutes. And so we're going around, and then after I was like, yeah, what did you think of him? And he was looking at my ass. He just kept looking at my ass and like getting too close to me and being weird. And it was so funny though, because he was gay. He wasn't like an outwardly gay, like he didn't like present as like flamboyant or something like that. But from what he told me, he was basically gay his entire life. And I was like, dude, I know he wasn't hitting on you and looking at your ass, even if I didn't see him. And even if he was, or like he just looked at it, I know there were no weird vibes there because he's gay. And of course, when I told her, she was like, oh, well, I know a lot of gay men aren't really gay. I was like, okay. Month later, we were done. But I remember like I did way too much thinking. Like I would go home and be like, what? She'd be like, yeah, your friend Johnny, like he gives me like serial killer pedophile energy. And Johnny now 10 years later is like a great family man. And like definitely not that. And what's interesting is that this play shows us that you don't need to plant evidence. If you want to plant the seed it out, it doesn't have to be these extreme things. Like my ex was probably being a little bit too extreme. It can rather happen, like for instance in this, with just a placing of a handkerchief, just like really simple stuff that can cause the mind to go into turmoil. It's like I saw a reel of like a guy, like all my married friends, like he's like throwing like scrunchies into their car that obviously like aren't their girlfriends or wives. But that one thing could, be honest, if your wife found an object that was not hers in your car, something that only females wear, definitely wouldn't be good. And what's interesting and what I have seen in my own life with these type of villain characters is that it just seems like it's fun for them. It's just like a form of like, it's like their pastime. Like, some people like to gossip. Some people like to talk about politics, some people like to talk about sports. Iago just seems, and these people just seem like they like to do this for fun. They just want to prove that they can do it and get that dopamine kick, and that's it. And what's so funny is that with all these people, with all these experiences, when Iago is finally confronted about, dude, why did you do this? He says nothing. He says, I'm done. I'm not going to say anything. And that's what these people do. Like, I remember assembling all this evidence against my ass. Like, look at everything that you've said. Like, this is crazy. Like, this is insane. You've literally detached me from everybody. You've foiled everyone's personality. Literally nothing. Like, it's so crazy. Like, it's just Shakespeare. Like, Shakespeare knew it all. And so that's why he has to be on this list, because we all, like, some of these other characters are extremes and like their actions are extreme, but we all know people that are definitely just like this. And my God, if you end up with one of them at your job or even worse in a relationship and you have a kid with them, holy cow, man, I'm so sorry. He assaulted 5 other women before he got to the asylum. And we are so culturally screwed up that we can't look at a situation where there are 2 screwed up people, and actually a whole group of screwed up people. But one of them, Nurse Ratched, is oppressing these men. And one of these men, who is not a good person, stands up for them and tries to lead them out of it and tries to awaken them. So in that situation, he is the hero. It doesn't mean that he's a moral person that we all need to be like entirely. But what he is doing is honorable and commendable. It's like all these idiots haven't read the Greeks, like classic literature. There are a ton of flawed characters in Shakespeare and all throughout history and literature that aren't good people, but in a moment become honorable and sacrifice their life for it. Nurse Ratched is the ultimate negative anima. She is far beyond the tyrant mother, because our culture loves to talk about toxic masculinity, which I think is fine if we are willing to talk about the toxic dialects of every other group. But we've put red tape around everything except toxic masculinity, which is silly to me, because anyone who's dealt with a devouring mother, with a tyrannical female figure, knows that it has a definite different flavor than a tyrannical man. And I'm not here to say that women or men are more evil, but the way they go about it, a lot of the time, is different. And Carl Jung knew this. Eric Newman, his protege, knew this. And this is why they spent so much time exploring and expanding this idea of the mother archetype, because we love to focus on the father. We love, our society is mostly run by men. But many of us, in terms of our interpersonal relationships, whether you were a son or a daughter, had more issues with your mother. Our society has a major collective mother complex, and that's for a different video. But Nurse Ratched is one of the biggest villains in literature, not because she is mean woman with power, but because she is, or I should say, she has been possessed by the institution. She can create a level of evil that she would never be able to create in her personal life. Because it's not like Nurse Ratched is some queen. It's not like she is some matriarch queen that's, chopping heads or doing something like that. She's a common everyday citizen who probably has a house in Salem, Oregon, and gardens and, is a good citizen. But we've created these institutions where common citizens can become not just tyrants, but evil queens of their own domain. And much like Holden, she doesn't have very much emotion. And one could say that she is scarier than Holden because Holden has these mythic qualities. He has these epic qualities to him. I have met Nurse Ratched type figures in my life. They just didn't have either the power over me or just enough power in general to do what she was doing. But if they did, they definitely would make that happen. I used to know a teacher in Las Vegas who had a kid who was pretty annoying. I had him the year before, but if he got worked up, he would start having like a seizure. If he had any form of stress, he would have a seizure. And then have to leave school for the day. She would consciously pick on him and screw with him to make him have a seizure a couple days of the week. She got other teachers fired. I mean, for the amount of control for just being a random teacher that she had, it was insane. What also makes Ratched really weird is that she doesn't want anything. What is she thinking? Judge Holden wants to own the world. Humbert Humbert, who we'll talk about in a second, wants to possess young women. Like, everybody really wants something, but she wants nothing inside. We get very little interiority from her or emotion the entire time. Kesey sets her up as the institution. She is a pure force of enforcement. And Randall tries to confront her. He tries to pull something out of her throughout the entire time. He is trying to psychologically mess with her. Because if someone actually has interiority, if they have a psyche, then you can confront them. You can battle with them. You can figure out how to reverse engineer it and make them understand. Because it's not just the oppression of McMurphy, but it's the oppression of people like the chief and all the men who are there willingly, and she's breaking down so they continue to stay there. We could also view Ratched as the collective unconscious of the benzo era, of the female Valium era. The 1950s weren't interested in bringing out the goddess energy of women, of really cultivating femininity. They were trying to tranquilize it. They were trying to make you smooth, polite, have the nuclear family values, and be this docile citizen. And it's interesting that she brings that unemotional nature to her job. And because she maybe can't take it out on her husband or on society, she definitely can to these guys. And so what makes her also really scary is that she is a wizard in terms of picking her team. People like this basically get rid of everybody else. They will fire everybody, drive everybody out so that they have people that will do their bidding. Even like the doctor and people that are above her are working for her. Like if she's convincing them that he needs a lobotomy and stuff like this, she is definitely in power. All the men, all her female nurse cronies, they are all into the gag because none of them say anything. And that's what McMurphy shows everyone, that this is only working because we've been seduced, that we're letting it happen to us. I've had friends that get in these wild relationships. I was in one for a while where I didn't write for like an entire year because I was just getting like emotionally bombarded with a bunch of crap. But much like her, my ex-girlfriend had everyone in her life whipped. There was this illusion surrounding her. And then when I finally started taking back some autonomy, I was like, wait, this is so dumb. And then I broke up with her. But that's the case for almost every single institution. That's the case for government in general. We're just all pretending. We're just all believing in authority. We're just all willing to give away our moral authority to other people. And so Ratched is scary because she's not a psychopath, you guys. She's not Judge Holden. She's not these crazy characters. She is a normal woman who is one of these outlier cases of what happens when you try to control everybody and smooth everybody over. And that's what recently happened to men. Men were trying to get smoothed over. And instead of us talking about actual masculinity in the 2000s, taking up what Robert Bly was doing with his mythopoetic movement in the 1990s, we tried to smash it completely. And what happened? The red pill movement was born. The Andrew Tates were born. All these people took back their power, but in exactly the wrong way. So let's move on to our next character. Boom. So next on our list, we have Satan from Paradise Lost. And what's so awesome about what Milton did is that first and foremost, when you look at like Christian theology and a lot of the stuff that, happened through time, hell was conceptualized as this pit, as this place of divine punishment and all of this. And what Milton does is he makes hell this internal place. He makes hell this internal state that follows Satan no matter where he is in the cosmos. Because what Satan embodies in Paradise Lost and why he's such an important villain and so archetypal for everything else is that he has this unconquerable will, like we've talked about with so many of these other characters. And it sends him into this feedback loop, right? Because he wants to liberate himself from God and he has the will. He thinks he has the will to do it. He's never going to give in, but because he never does, he continues to just, descend into this cycle of self-hatred and all of this different stuff. And it's such an important point because we don't really think about dialectics, but that's one of the worst parts of modern culture and polarization. This is what a lot of people don't talk about, is that when you're born into polarization, then you aren't conceptualizing reality normally. Here's a great example. So I have family, my mom's from Utah, so I have a lot of family from Utah, and I went to university in Utah, and something I noticed, which was insane to me, is that there was this divide between the Mormons and the non-Mormons. And so the place I went to school at, that county had like over 90% Mormons, and the Mormons are a very strict religion, very shameful for people that don't follow it. It's very weird. So there was this group of, these Mormons, but then there were the non-Mormons, and the kids that I met in Utah were crazier than the kids I met when I lived in Portland, when I was still really young, when I lived in Las Vegas, all the time I spent in Southern California and the Pacific Northwest and other places in the world. They were by far the craziest because they were trying to be not Mormon. They were stuck in this loop where they were trying to signal to everybody by doing all this stuff that they weren't that. Through fashion trends, through their behavior, through their political ideology, through their nihilism. I saw multiple knife fights when I was there and with different groups of people. So many fights, like it was ridiculous. But what's interesting about all them, there was this internal battle and and with technology and stuff and realizing it kind of accentuates that and seeing what other people are doing. But let's go back. So we were just talking about Iago, from Shakespeare. And Shakespeare kind of created or really took to the next level this internal villain, right? This villain that's like mostly not doing things through action, but like just within their mind. But a lot of the time Shakespeare was doing it in these dramatic moments in history or something like that. And what Milton did, around 50 years after Shakespeare died, was take it all to the next level in terms of metaphysics, right? Like, okay, we're doing all this character internal stuff on the ground, but how can we apply that to Christianity? And that's what Milton does so well. And so we could say that Shakespeare is like moral realism, right? And just like, this is like what's happening. But Satan in Paradise Lost is basically the prototype for existentialism. This slow internalization of a lack of meaning, any order in reality, this divide. And so it's interesting that there's this beautiful lineage of, we have Shakespeare, then we have Milton, then we have Goethe and Mephistopheles, then we have like Byron and Dostoevsky, then the existentialists. It's this beautiful lineage. And so now let's actually talk about it. So what's interesting is that the best poetry in Paradise Lost, one could say the best poetry that Milton ever wrote, but he definitely turns up the dial with Satan. And William Blake said, shout out William Blake, the hero of this channel, the reason Milton wrote in fetters and when he wrote of angels and God and at liberty when of devils and hell, it is because he was a true poet and of the devil's party without knowing it. And it's so true that when you're reading his lines and what he's saying, it's I don't want to say it's all things that we've thought before, but at some level we've seen it if we're fans of literature. And when he says things, what thou the field be lost, all is not lost, the unconquerable will and study of revenge, immortal hate and courage never to submit or yield. That's a beautiful writing. That's him basically saying, I'm going to never accept any form of truth. I'm going to sit here in my pride forever. And so much like, Humbert Humbert, as we talked about earlier, Satan is this master at persuasion. He tells Eve that your eyes that seem so clear, yet are but dim, shall perfectly be then opened and cleared, and ye shall be gods. And so what I first felt when I read this, and I know a lot of people that feel the same way, is that Milton made the devil, this concept of Lucifer or whatever, feel realistic for, I would say, like one of the first times in history. Like the talk on what I view as the adversarial energy. I'm not a Christian. I don't believe in like Lucifer, but I do believe in like the adversarial energy. Like if you've ever gone into any religion or spirituality and actually believe in it, it's definitely apparent real fast once you start tapping into things that exists. And you can see it in some of your own decisions or how other people act, that there's something that just takes people over. But being able to describe it for the first time, I mean, it's a real accomplishment, you guys. Like I said, it's been described all throughout time, but it's kind of really cool to see like it, in literature really starting to come out, because it's the internal voice. It's this internal battle that we face a lot of the time. And in movies or in music or all these other places, we don't exactly get to see that battle play out as well as we do with books. And that continues to be books' advantage, that we get to explore interiority. And when we think about evil and all of this, that's where evil really starts to fester. And that's how a lot of the time people, these figures, manipulate you. But I'm not interested in the tactics of the manipulator. I'm interested in what's inside the manipulator, what drew them to that. And Paradise Lost is a perfect example of that. And so Satan has to be on this list. One of the top villains of all time, obviously, with the corruption of Adam and Eve and everything that happens in the book. I mean, really great stuff, really good stuff by Milton, who at time I have a problematic relationship with, but I can't give him credit for this. And let's now move on to our next villain. So next we have Lord Henry from The Picture of Dorian Gray. And one of the reasons that I really want to pick him is that a lot of what he embodies, what you could call the ontology of youth, this belief in being youthful, this being of youth forever, has just taken over our society. Henry basically gives Dorian this manifesto that basically says that our problems in our world are only aesthetic problems. Like all of ethics, earlier I was talking about objective morality and all that. Henry, because of his charming personality, believes it's all aesthetics. And it ends up leading to an absolute disaster in the novel with the spoiler alert, suicide of Sybil. And he says, at some point, and I'm paraphrasing here, he's like, wow, how cool must that be? I wish that someone did that for me. And this belief in aesthetics and youth has taken over our entire society. And we like to think of, Botox and the Kardashians or stuff like that, but it's all across the map. People being obsessed with health and fitness and longevity are just absolute denial of death with religious fanaticism and all this different stuff. There is a supreme focus on aesthetics, and it usually has a link to the most unconscious cultures. Because liking beautiful things isn't wrong. Liking high art isn't wrong. Trying to stay beautiful and stay healthy isn't wrong. But when it becomes an obsession, then things can turn into an absolute disaster. And Henry just continues to push this onto Dorian. After Sybil's death, he sends him a yellow book that's basically this manual in French decadence that continues to basically just program him into this mentality. And something that makes him different is that he rejects this idea of the will. He says that life isn't governed by will or intention. But if we don't have any will, then we can't be guilty about everything. And then that means that our entire experience is just sensation, that our life is just art that's being splattered around, the picture of Dorian Gray. Like, there's so many good narrative things going on here that that's why it's one of the better novels of all time, in my opinion. But this is actually how people feel. Most people can't conceptualize what they are doing ethically because they have no grounding in ethics or objective morality or anything like that. But they're not rooted in just like a barbarian impulse. They are seeing this all as, what do we say, an experience, as these sensations. They can do immoral things. Like, I've literally heard people describe it like this: how they get seduced and how they reconcile with cheating on their spouse or doing something dumb. Like, it's all through their own hedonism, all through this weird aesthetic conception they are having, even if and they don't even realize it. These aren't like artists. These are just random people. But our culture, and I think even social media and being so inundated in pictures and images and all of that, drives this even further. And that's a rant for an entire other video. But Lord Henry really is the embodiment of this idea that Wilde first saw in his own life, and if you read about his life and the people he knew, and he was spot on with it, and definitely a villain. A lot of the time it's people that push people into this mentality. It's those dumb friends that enable you, I've seen it before. It's crazy. A lot of the time when people make irrational decisions like cheating or doing these things, they have this weird support system that's like, yeah, fuck Johnny, you don't need to do this, or fuck Amy. And so boom, there it is. Lord Henry had to make the list. If you haven't read this novel, you have to go read it. And now moving on to our final character. So next we have a Steinbeck character, which I know so many people are going to get excited about. And apparently next Netflix is adapting East of Eden, and Florence Pugh is going to be Cathy Ames, who I'm going to be talking about here. And so I love how Steinbeck opens up about Cathy in this novel. He says, I believe there are monsters born in the world to human parents. And he is really talking about not this idea of nurture, but this idea of nature. And we're not really allowed to talk about that. No one really, I would say, believes in that as much anymore, that, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree and you're going to be just like your parents and all of this. But what's interesting about using this in a novel is that it prevents us, the reader, from giving her any excuses. We kind of have to believe Steinbeck here because everyone always has an excuse. I was a public school teacher for 8 years. And never once did I have any kid that was mean to me, that I had to get in trouble, that had two loving parents that dumped a ton of time and attention into the kid. Never once did I have any problem with those kids. The kids that I was having to do parent-teacher conferences with and go to all these meetings always had a broken and screwed up family. You could tell in 10 seconds that the vibes were totally off and something was wrong. And in those meetings, though, there would be a million different excuses. They would blame me. You're being a racist. He's not doing anything wrong. You're lying. There was always an excuse, or his dad's not here. There was always something. But by Steinbeck giving us this information for all the stuff that Cathy ends up doing, we have no way to excuse her because that's just who she is. And it's, in our world of CBT and psychoanalysis, I've met people like this. I've I don't know if they were born this way, but at some point they become unfixable. And the only way they could get fixed is if they were like dedicating themselves to like a daily meditation practice, doing ayahuasca ceremonies, becoming a born again, like really extreme measures. And so instead of us focusing on her, we only can focus on what she does. And we just talked about Nurse Ratched, but Cathy is a mother in the story, and Steinbeck uses her to attack the concept, the idea of the mother. Because when the novel starts, she's this almost pastoral figure, you know, having these babies out in the countryside. But then it really fast turns into a total shit show with her shooting her, spoiler alerts, everybody, with Cathy shooting her husband, abandoning her kids, becoming this madame at the brothel and manipulating and causing insanity over there. And another little twist that Steinbeck does is that we have heard about all these really intellectual and charismatic characters, but Cathy more falls on the, one could say, unconscious side, because a genius thing that Steinbeck does is, one of the things that many novels do with a character like Cathy is that there's a form of bibliotherapy done on them where they go on this character arc where they're kind of worked through, and sometimes they don't realize that potential. It's like a failed positive arc and they fall back into darkness, or sometimes they come out. And when you look at a typical novel, Cathy would seem like the person to do that, right? But Steinbeck later in the novel says, and I'm combining together some quotes, quote, "Who knows but that she tried to tell someone or everyone what she was like and could not, for lack of a common language. Her life may have been her language, formal, developed, indecipherable." All the other characters in this novel actually work with language, including the narrator. But Cathy is another one of these voids, because we have no idea what she is doing and why, even though she's a central character in the novel. And this is one of the scariest things of all. What happens when you can no longer reason with the person that's really pivotal to your life? We get to talk about these villains, these slashers, these crazy individuals, but stuff like this happens on both sides of the aisle all of the time. Someone just does something, some form of evil, violence against their family, abandoning their family, all of this stuff, and and they never know why. And then years later, they're found doing these moral, I should say immoral things. And people try to go and reason with them and talk to Cathy and do all this, but nothing works. And if we're talking about something psychologically terrible, this is probably more common than anything else that we've talked about. We can maybe say like the devouring tyrannical mother, like a Nurse Ratched, could be pretty common, but this on both sides of the aisle is also very common. The indecipherable villain, the indecipherable person who you love, who you have to be connected to for whatever reason for the rest of your life. So Boombada Connect, everyone. There it is. If you guys like this video, be sure to leave a comment. Let me know who I missed. Leave a like. If you guys want to support me, of course, you can go join my book club, get access to all my courses, and support me over on Substack. Each subscription means the world to me. Each subscription helps me out more than you guys actually know. And so thank you guys, and I will see each and every one of you in the next video.